Welcome to Libertarians on Tap on live streaming on X and YouTube. How are you doing tonight, Kimmy?
Doing great, Jay. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I got you loud and clear. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. I am super excited about our guest tonight. So we got Lieutenant Colonel Larry Brock, somebody who I've come to admire. He has a fantastic space on X that he does Monday through Friday, The Reckoning, which is really just a solid space, brings in a lot of people, great conversations in there. And his story has really been really interesting to me. And so, in his space, he talks a lot about politics and things that are going on. But you hear a little bit about him, but tonight we get to talk to him one-on-one, and he's just got really a lot to him, and I just find him to be an interesting person. So I'm super thankful that he is going to be joining us here tonight.
Yeah, me too, Jay. The only time I've ever really talked to Larry is when we've done spaces and he's come in or popped in as a listener or as a speaker. So I haven't really gotten to know him yet. So I'm super excited to get to know him, talk about his military background and why he what's prompting him to want to get into politics. As a Texas congressman, correct?
Yep, right. Texas State House HD 106. So we're gonna talk to him about that, and we'll talk to him a little bit. He was a J6 prisoner, and so we're gonna kind of just get to know him and get to know what drives him. So without further ado, go ahead, Kimmy.
Oh, no, I'm just super excited. Go ahead, Jay.
Yep. Without further ado, we'll welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Jay. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome.
Talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Colonel. Yeah, it's an honor to have you in here. Like I said, you're somebody that I talk to on a regular basis in spaces. Great take on politics and things that are going on around the world. And so it's just really a pleasure to have you here tonight one-on-one and, kind of hear more about you and to get people excited about your state house run.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's definitely going to be a challenge to unseat an incumbent. He's been in there for a while, but frankly, I think I'm up to it. I like a challenge. So this is going to be a good fight in a nice civil way at the ballot box.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're a Dallas native originally, right?
Well, Dallas-Fort Worth area. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and then I lived here all through high school. Had the good fortune to get recruited to go to the Air Force Academy. So I went there for 4 years in the coldest part of the United States. I say that as a Texan, but Colorado Springs was quite brutal in the winter back then for a man that liked 100-degree summers. So went there, and then after pilot training, after the academy, I went to pilot training in Del Rio, Texas, right on the Mexican border, and then got to fly the A-10 Thunderbolt, which is the best airplane in the Air Force, bar none.
Yeah, I did 20 years in the Army, and I can tell you that Army infantry would tell you the exact same thing. That was one of their favorite assets to have, and because what you guys could provide to them. I was on a mission one time in Afghanistan, and it was I was medevac, but I'll never forget it. The A-10s were working with us, trying to protect, us from getting hit. We were going in to save some troops that had been injured, and the A-10s were chasing the Taliban up in the mountains, and I'll never forget it. They were getting closer. They'd do their runs. They were getting closer, and you could just hear them talking, and then all of a sudden you just see the laser beam coming down from the sky, and that was the end of those guys. But we were thankful to have you there.
Yeah, I always enjoyed working with helicopters as well. I was a combat search and rescue pilot. So that's a special qualification that A-10 pilots get after a while. And so I enjoyed various methods of protecting helicopters. We called it daisy chaining or, high wheel around the helicopters, but that was always a lot of fun, keeping an eye on you guys from above. So totally enjoyed that. And, my time in Afghanistan was exceptional to me. I look back on that, even though the living was hard, I look back on it with, just absolute fondness because you're doing what I feel I was put on this earth to do, which is, to pilot that airplane and to save ground troops. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Jay, but I was also attached to the 82nd Airborne for, I guess it was 3 lovely years from 1993 to 96 as a jump air liaison officer. So I can speak a little hua. So I actually think I was a lot A-10 pilot after I had done that tour with the Army, because I understood a lot more about the U.S. Army. So that was actually a really smart move on the Air Force's part.
Yeah, some of my joint assignments were my best ones too, like where we worked with different branches or whatever, and we combined assets, because you get the best of both worlds sometimes when you do that, because we all have our specialties or whatever, but you can draw from each other. So that's pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Air Force Academy, obviously not an easy thing to get into. So obviously you're pretty bright dude starting off the bat. Yep. Yeah. So, pretty prestigious degree there, sir. Starting out your career, and so you retired in 2014. Is that correct?
Yes, 2014. Now, what I did is I did 8 years of active duty, and then I did 9 years in what's called the active reserve. So 17 total years there. And then to finish out my career, I was in what's called the inactive reserve, but I just recruited for the Air Force Academy and Air Force ROTC. And then once you're over 20, your time at the academy counts. So it was a total of 29 years of military service from 1985 when I joined the academy through 2014.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
That's kind of what I wanted to go to next, Larry. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jay. I just want to talk. I guess I do want to kind of go into your 29 years of service in the Air Force. I mean, gosh, I would love for our audience to hear this story. You could walk us through the 29 years of your service in the Air Force.
Absolutely.
Including your role as an A-10 Warthog pilot and any notable combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq.
Absolutely. So
better on your military background. Thank you so much, Larry.
No, absolutely not a problem. So again, I kind of need to go back a little bit. When I was a young boy, my dad was assigned to an Air Force Reserve unit. And so he would actually take me out in what was called the bread van. He was a radio repairman for the Air Force. And so we would go out to the end of the runway and I would watch F-105s take off, because that was my dad's reserve unit. And then the base that we were at also was a big strategic air command base. So it had B-52s and KC-135s, and they would do these massive scramble exercises that were really cool to see as a 5-year-old boy watching all those airplanes take off, that quickly. So I'm, 5th generation Texan, 4th generation American military service. My great-grandfather and on both maternal and paternal sides served in World War I. My great-grandfather on the USS Raleigh in the Navy, and then my other one was a doughboy in World War I. And then in World War II, my grandfather and his brother both enlisted on December the 8th, 1941 from a small little Texas town called Haskell. So that's where in Texas, there's this mythical line where the dirt goes from brown to red. So it's on the red side of the red dirt line, wherever that is. But so they enlisted. My grandfather tried to become a pilot, but he was colorblind. And so he wound up being an ordnance non-commissioned officer. And then his brother was in Patton's 3rd Army as an infantryman, and he was killed by a sniper in Patton's Drive on Bastogne. So I would go out to my great-grandparents' house and play as a small boy, and there were pictures of them on the wall. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, his brother, and then my father, who served in the United States Navy during Vietnam and then got out and got into the Air Force. And he got a little bit smarter. So, and then there was a blank spot. So I was pretty much told that blank spot was for me. We're very much a military family. So, that kind of started it. And then I always knew I wanted to serve, but, with Ronald Reagan as president, pride came back to the American military. And so I really wanted to join the Air Force. And my father managed to make that happen. You know, he connivingly said, hey, how'd you like to just go take a trip to the Air Force Academy and just see what it's like? Because my plan was to go to Baylor University or the University of Texas and become a doctor. And so I took him up on that opportunity. And then, you know, my grandfather had worked in the oil fields with Texas Congressman Jim Wright, former Speaker of the House. And so I got a congressional appointment pretty easily. Now, I did earn it. I finished second in my class and did well on the SAT and all the things that the Academy looks for, you know, captain of athletic teams, school president, not of the National Honor Society, that type of nonsense. So did all those things. Then, you know, I went to the Academy, and after my freshman year, I still planned on being a doctor, but my dad finagled a backseat ride for me in an F4 Phantom. So I get a call from my father at like 6 o'clock in the morning saying, I need you to out here by 7:30. I'm like, okay, because it had been a rough night out with friends. So I walk in and they're like, when's the last time you had a drink? And I'm like, 12 hours and 1 minute. And they're like, you're going to fit in perfectly. So I went and had a backseat ride in an F4 Phantom, and I landed from that sortie where we pulled G's, we dropped bombs, we did air-to-air combat, we hit a tanker, and I was like, I've got to do this for a living. This is just too much fun. And so I went back to the Academy, did well there, didn't do as well as I did in high school, but I finished in the top 15% of my class, and I went to pilot training in Del Rio, Texas. Now, you need to usually finish in the top 10% of your class in pilot training to get a fighter, so I'm pretty sure I did. And so I got my number 2 airplane at my number 1 location. I wanted to go fly in Europe. And, you know, Kimmy, forgive me, I don't know how young you are, but you look younger than me. So back in the day, the Soviet Union, I always thought they were going to attack us. As a matter of fact, my degree from the Air Force Academy was International Affairs Soviet Area Specialist. So, you know, my thought being, know thy enemy as thyself, and in 100 wars you will not lose. So I wanted to go and fly that airplane in Europe, where if Big Red, the Russian army, rolled through Germany, that, you know, I would be over there to stop them. Now, the only reason I wanted an F-16 was that my grandfather, after World War II, had used the GI Bill, and he worked for General Dynamics on the F-16 airplane. So I always thought it would be cool to fly the plane that my grandfather helped build. So, however, the Air Force had other plans, and they put me in the A-10, and I could not be happier that I got that one wrong and that I got to fly the A-10. The mission of the A-10 is absolutely pure. You know, you are the cavalry. When the bad guys are shooting at the good guys, you come in and save the day. And there is nothing better in all of warfare than to hear a guy say direct hit lead, and then get an email from him saying, hey, because you were there, I get to go home and see my wife and daughter. You know, I'll take that to my grave. It's better than any medal that the Air Force ever gave me. So I did have, all right, so you said walk you through my career. I went to RAF Bentwaters in Europe, which is a little town called Ipswich, England, 90 miles northeast of London. And then we forward deployed to Germany at a couple of forward operating bases, which was always interesting because they were designed for chemical warfare and, you know, for the bases to be hit by the Russians. So, you know, we practiced defending the Fulda Gap and flying along what was the scratch, in other words, the line between East and West Germany. So we were ready to rub Big Red's nose in it if they crossed the line. So one thing that was, I'm going to call it a little eye-opening, and you may not know this, Kimmy, but when you go to pilot training, one of the first things they do is they take a footprint, an ink footprint of your foot, you know, at your current age. And so, you know, the reason they do that is the boot often survives wreckage. And so they wanted to be able to identify you. And another kind of grim statistic is, as an A-10 pilot, if we had gotten in a war with the Russians, my life expectancy was 2 weeks. So they didn't expect us to live very long if we got into a full-on fight with the Russians. Fortunately, though, the wall fell. Now, again, 1991 is when I was in A-10 training. And that's when Desert Storm happened. And we were all hoping for a 6-month delay so that we could get over there and fight in it. But I missed that one, sort of. I got in at the tail end of it in like August. So technically I qualify for the Desert Storm medal, but I never say that I fought in Iraq in Desert Storm because that would be a lie and I don't feel comfortable saying it. But I do have a Kuwait service ribbon and a Kingdom of Saudi Arabia medal on my service dress because I was entitled to it since I got over there before Desert Storm was technically over. Jay, I'm sure you understand all that. All right, so after that, I went to Pope Air Force Base, and I was a jump ALO with the 82nd Airborne Division. We didn't really do anything except exercises during that time. But my unit, do you remember when Saddam Hussein rolled his tank south towards Kuwait and the United States reacted? Well, that happened twice. We called it Operation Deny Christmas. So I believe it was 94 and 95. I spent Christmas over in the desert. And probably that was the blackest mood I've ever been in, was flying into Operation Southern Watch at the time on Christmas Day. And the reason I had to do that is I was the scheduler. So, you know, since I determined who got the bad deals, you always give yourself the worst deal possible, which for me was flying at 4 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day. So, you know, that's just what we did there. So I did that. Then we deployed up to Ahmed Al Jaber in Kuwait, but we were basically flying the southern no-fly zone. Couple of incidences of note. I did have a MiG-23 try and shoot me down, but my name is not Scott O'Grady. I do turn my electronic combat pod on. And so fortunately, you know, I saw the warning, and on the screen, I asked AWACS what it was. They came back and told me, and then we did all the aerial choreography to get me out of the weapons threat of the MiG-23. And you're saying, why didn't you shoot him down? Oh, you have no idea how much I would have loved to, but it was at night, and the night vision goggles we had at the time was about a 40-degree soda straw. So I couldn't really do much to see that. Another instance was, you know, one of my buddies and I were fired at, and we had the gun locked up and ready to fire, but they wouldn't allow us to do it because of its proximity to a mosque. So that was an incredibly frustrating thing to be shot at and not allowed to fire back. The rules of engagement at the time were if you could egress the battle space, do it. So I got to feel the sting that a lot of my older pilots had told me about from Vietnam when they weren't allowed to attack things that were shooting at them. So I have a definite sympathy for those guys in the war they fought. After that, I went to, I became an instructor pilot while I was in an online fighter squadron. And then I went to Davis-Monthan to train new A-10 pilots from 96 to 98. Now, 96 to 98 is really the only time I have not deployed to the Middle East for at least a few months in a year. Now, when I got out and got in the reserves, that went down to a couple of weeks sometimes, but usually for me, it was a month because I was a very senior pilot and I had a lot of qualifications that you want to have a pilot have. You don't just walk in and they say, here's the keys, you can do everything. There is a defined training program for all the different missions that an A-10 can do. And I'm certain it's the exact same way in the Black Hawk. Now, after that, I went into the Air Force Reserves, and honestly, we just kind of deployed for a few weeks to Turkey, a few weeks to Kuwait for a couple of years. No big deal. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. Now, at the time, I was working for American Airlines, and I was supposed to fly on September the 10th through New York down to Fort Lauderdale, and the next day fly Lauderdale to LaGuardia and then back to Dallas. But obviously, well, not obviously, but on the 10th, there was a big line of thunderstorms in New York, and so my flight got canceled. So on the 11th, I was on standby, and I was listening to a sports radio station when I heard that an airplane has just hit the World Trade Center. Now, I was kind of confused by that because usually when a big line of thunderstorms comes through, the weather's clear for a day. I mean, we've all seen that. We live in areas where that happens. But I still thought it was just a small Cessna. And then right when I was pulling in my driveway, they said a second airliner has just hit the World Trade Center. So I ran in, turned on the TV. And honestly, I think it was Fox News. It might have been the Communist News Network. But, I saw an airplane hitting the World Trade Center. So I immediately picked up my cell phone and called my squadron intel officer. And he didn't know what was going on because he works inside a secure facility. So I called his landline, got a hold of him and said, you need to step out. We're under attack. I immediately knew we were under attack. And so for me, it was never a period really of mourning. It was immediate. Okay, now it's on. For me, I went straight to, I want to get over there and I want to get involved in this war. So we, like almost every other military unit, received warning orders a few days later to be ready to deploy. And rumors persisted as September 11th turned into October, November, December that we were going to deploy. So you have a bag ready to go at all times. Well, that turned into January, February, and in March, we weren't sure we were going to get to go at all. So as Murphy would have it, I called my squadron commander and said, hey, I'd like to take a quick family vacation to Canada to go skiing. And he's like, absolutely. I'm not sure we're going to even be involved now. So I'm at the top of the mountain, nothing, check my cell phone, get to the bottom of the mountain, and I see that I've got a message from my squadron commander, and he says, I need you down here. I need you on a plane in 48 hours. So I'm in Canada now. So I called my chief pilot at American Airlines and said, I need help getting back because all the flights were full. And, by the time I got my family to the airport, there were 2 first-class tickets and 2 coach tickets waiting for my family to get home. So, me and the boy sat in coach and the wife and the daughter sat up in first. But the bottom line is I got home. So I was ready to go 48 hours after I got the call from the boss. And then when we were down there, there was a delay in the tankers that were going to take our airplanes across the pond. The pond, Kimmy, is what we call the Atlantic Ocean in the Air Force. So I got to come home for a weekend. And as it turns out, it was, I believe, either Easter weekend. I think it was Easter weekend. And so I was standing in a church, and, it's one of these mega churches in the Fort Worth area, Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I just did a 360 and looked around going, this is why we have to preserve our way of life. So for me, it was always personal. It was always an attack on faith and on family and on country. So I was highly motivated to get to Afghanistan. I arrived in 2002, early April, and we began flying combat missions immediately. The first time I ever dropped in combat, it's funny, I was flying with a Russian 1-50 map because we didn't have good maps over there. And I was taking directions from a man on the ground that kept messing up his norths and souths. And as a pilot, that creates a problem when he's trying to talk you onto something. And honestly, it was a great lesson because between myself and my wingman, we had about 4,000 hours in the jet, but it took us a while to pinpoint the exact target. Now, in hindsight, I could have immediately just thrown down a couple of white phosphorus rockets on the ground and established a point of reference to where we could have talked from those. And I learned that lesson. Fortunately, the guys I was targeting that day were preparing to shoot at Americans. They were digging mortar pits to hit one of our safe houses. So we saw them and we decided to hit them early. It's kind of a funny story, real quick. So I roll in and I shoot my first rocket. And the plan was I would shoot 2 rockets and then my wingman would drop bombs and then I would drop bombs on them, and then we would strafe them, whatever was left. So I roll in and I hit 2 rockets, and I hear the magic words, direct hit lead, your first rocket, 2, put your bombs right on lead's first rocket. And I'm thinking, sweet. So I'm pulling off the target, maneuvering left, right, making sure that they can't get an easy gun tracking solution on me, making sure flares are going out of the back of my airplane so an infrared missile can't shoot me down. And my wingman turns my nice warm fuzzy into a cold spiky by saying, hey, I only see 1 rocket. So I roll inverted look, and sure enough, only 1 rocket had hit. Had bloomed. So the ground fact said, yeah, that's because the first rocket went right through a guy. And so I come back and land, and they talked about changing my tactical call sign from Torch, which is what it is, to Rhino. And I am sure glad they did not do that, because that would be a horrible name to have as a pending politician to go into Republican politics. So, so in the O2 deployment, I do want to point out something else, because the Air Force always gets accused of soft living. Well, we were 13 men in a GP tent, no air conditioning. I was assigned to night fly, and I couldn't really sleep. And the doc's like, well, here you go. And he hands me a military grade sleeping pill. So that's, that was the solution until we finally got one tent that was air conditioned. And if you were working at night, you were allowed to sleep in it. We called it the ice cave. It was a great pleasure. But, when we first got there, you could only shower every 4 days. And that was a Navy shower. So that's just rinse off with a kitchen spray thing, soap up, and then rinse off again. And then I won't describe other facilities, and we were eating MREs. Eventually, we got one hot Army TRAT meal. That's a field kitchen meal a day. So that was definitely great. But one of the things about being in a reserve unit is we decided to put a couple of guys down in Qatar, and they would shop for us and send a lot of food up in ice chests for us. So every Friday, our squadron would have a good cookout. Now, we were a combined unit of New Orleans guys and Kansas City guys. And so the food, as you can imagine, was quite good, Cajun and Kansas City barbecue. So we did that. And then in 2004, I went back again. In 2003, when we invaded Iraq, I didn't get to play in that fight as a pilot because I had 3 ear surgeries. Now, before I deployed in 2002, I knew something was wrong with my ear because every time I would pull off a target, it felt like an ice pick was stabbing me in my eardrum. But there was no way, after waiting so long to actually go to war, that I wasn't going to go to the fight. So I wound up having to go see a doctor. The doctor told my wife that I had the MRI tech told my wife that I had a brain tumor. I didn't, obviously, but so never believe an MRI tech. And long story short, after 3 surgeries, I finally got qualified to go and fly the airplane again. And that's why I went to Afghanistan in 2004. Now, 2004, there's a couple of really cool missions. I've talked about one on my space. That was the mission to find a downed CASA airplane where my squadron commander basically hit a home run and found them. I think if we'd done some things differently, we could have saved a guy's life. I talked about that. It wasn't me or my responsibility. And to be fair to me, I was pushing the guy to do something that might have saved his life, but he just didn't want to do that. I got to drop again. There's a mission that my squadron commander at the time, and now a retired 2-star general, wrote about, and he wrote about it to the judge for January the 6th. But I basically built a descent route on my inertial navigation system or GPS system to get down below the weather so that I could drop bombs on the bad guys. So it's a pretty risky maneuver to be building that thing at night, because if I had punched in the wrong digit, and it's 10-digit coordinates or 8-digit coordinates, I could have flown into the side of a mountain while I was in the weather. So again, I'm not bragging. Honestly, I think that's what that's why the American military is good, is we don't care about our own lives. We care about saving each other's lives. And so, he fortunately knew about that mission, and he wrote about it later in life. But that was probably my most notable mission in there. There was another time where a helicopter hit the side of a mountain, and it was an MH-53. It was an Air Force Special Operations helicopter, and it crash landed on a wash in the middle of a town. I can't remember the name of the town. I want to say it was Khafji, but I could be mistaking an Iraqi town. There's been so many Arab names that are there, but the Air Force had wanted me to be about 150 miles away. But I basically just blew off our command and control system and put myself where I thought the fight would be. Now, it's always a little risky to do that, because if something breaks out and you're farther away, well, they can yell at you for violating orders. But as it turns out, I was right, because the Air Force was able to say that 7 minutes after that helicopter crash landed, combat search and rescue assets were on site. So again, that was me not doing what Big Air Force was telling me, because I had talked to the guys that were going to do the mission, and they knew it was a high threat mission. But to be fair, the guys in the command and control system in the airborne warning and control aircraft, they told me to go where I wanted to go after I called them and spoke to them privately about the need to get there. So it did work. There were many other missions over there. There was one that stands out where a guy we really wanted to kill ran into a mosque. And before I could get there, he was in that mosque. And then I had to get permission, because we couldn't just blow up a mosque. And by the time I got permission to blow up the mosque, all the women and children from the village were inside the mosque. And so they left it up to me. That's how bad they wanted this guy dead. And I asked the guys on the ground, is this guy getting out of this village alive? And they told me, no, he's not going to get out alive. And so I chose not to drop that bomb. And I've often wondered about that, because he did get away. But I'm still thankful, because to my knowledge, I had a perfectly clean war. I only killed bad guys to my knowledge. So again, that's a good thing to be able to say, because I think, had I done that, I would live with, a little bit of shame about it. Not because, it's the enemy that puts us in that situation, but I'm just very thankful that did not happen to me, if that makes sense. After those 2 deployments, honestly, there was just a lot of peacetime nonsense. And then I left flying the A-10 in 2007 and became a recruiter for the Air Force Academy. Really nothing notable there, Kimmy, with one exception, and that is I get a call after the recruiting window has closed, and they said, I need you to look at your email. So I look at my email, and it's a form from a lieutenant recommending a senior airman to go to the Air Force Academy. And the email said, I know it's too late and the window's closed, but read this. And so I read the form, and the senior airman had been wounded in an ambush, had refused to be evacuated, had directed airstrikes that neutralized the ambush, and then got on the last helicopter out with the Army commander he was supporting. So my answer back was, you're right, it is too late, but we're going to change that. Let me work it. And so it worked the way it's supposed to work. I said, I understand the window's closed, but this kid deserves the chance. And so my boss said yes. I called the academy the next day. The colonel that I spoke with said, yeah, it's too late, but let me work on it. 2 days later, we had an answer. 3 days later, he was flying out of his forward operating base in Afghanistan to Kandahar so that he could take the SAT, of all the stupid things. And then he had to get an Air Force Academy physical. So he got into the academy, and, that was just a great answer. From the chain of command on how things are supposed to be done. But overall, Kimmy, if I look back on my time in the service, I'll tell you that, I always had my hand in the air to go to war, and I don't regret it for a second. It cost me my first marriage. But in fairness to me, she knew who I was when she married me. I mean, she knew I was a fighter pilot. She knew that in my heart of hearts, I was always going to go to war. I had the fortune of working underneath men like Seth Wilson, call sign Growth, that was a Raven forward air controller in Vietnam, and learning lessons from him, like there is no substitute for being in the fight. Always be prepared to be shot down. Always be prepared, for your base to be attacked. He was a fount of information, and he was one of those grizzled old warriors that when he spoke up as a young lieutenant and a young captain, people listened. I know I certainly did. And I had also, I flew with a man named Colonel Frank Peck that was a wild weasel in Vietnam, and the lessons I learned from him were fantastic as well. So, what I tried to do as I became more senior is pass those lessons on to the younger guys. But, honestly, the war's changed so much that, you got to sometimes say, all right, there is really no substitute for looking out of the window, seeing the guy on the ground, finding the enemy with your own eyes rather than sensors, and then, putting paid to them. So I consider that a great time of my life. I was very fortunate to carry the sword for this country. We were very much in a holy war with them. You know, if one side's in a holy war, you're in a holy war, whether you want to be or not. So I was very thankful that I had the opportunity to fight for this nation. It was honestly one of the best things I ever did.
Oh my gosh, Larry.
Sorry for the 10-hour dissertation there.
Oh no, I'm just like in tears over here. What you and Jay and all the others served have done for this country is just absolutely amazing. And just having to go through all that, I just can't even imagine. And just thank you so much for your service. I only have a couple of military people in my family, and that was both of my grandparents, both of my, let me see, my grandfathers were they were older, of course. I think they were in World War II, or I'm assuming, I can't remember, but I know my grandfather used to always say those damn, I can't talk about the Vietnamese.
Yeah, I get it.
Whatever that word was. But thank you so much, Larry.
Yeah, my father didn't have good words to say about the North Vietnamese either. And, you know, my grandfather on my mother's side was a waist gunner on a B-25, and he was not very fond of the Japanese. So, you know, there was a lot to be said for that.
Yes, and just thank you so much to both Jay and you for
Absolutely.
your service. I do want to thank some of our listeners that are in our comments. I apologize, guys. Stacy, Land of Illusion. I just want to, and also, sorry. Mav, I just want to thank you guys for being here and for sharing out the space. I'm not able to comment on your comments, but thank you all for being here and sharing out the space. We're getting a lot of good response so far. And thank you so much, Larry. I don't know if Jay has any questions for you now, and just thank you for your service.
You know, but again, I appreciate you saying that. But, you know, Jay, I bet you feel the same way. I mean, I told you what was expected of me from my family. And you know, it's always hard to hear that, because to me it was duty. And, you know, that is a word that is lost. It was my duty as an American man to go and fight. It never occurred to me not to do it. And so, I mean, I don't want to sound unappreciative, but, you know, I just think that it was what I was supposed to do. And, you know, it was the right thing to do. What about you, Jay? I mean, how do you, I mean, again, Kimmy, I thank you for saying that. I don't know how to respond to that. Usually I just say it was my duty or thank you back.
Yeah, it's, you know, I'm thankful for people that are thankful, because I knew what I was getting into doing it. I got paid to do it. And, you know, it's, you know, I wanted to serve my country, but I don't expect any thanks for that. Honestly, I don't expect anybody to say thanks. So it's kind of awkward for me when people do that, but I appreciate that. And I just say thank you back. But, you know, when I originally joined, I joined the U.S. Coast Guard, and I wanted to get a trade or get some money for college or whatever. Like, I didn't really know what I was doing, because I was 18 years old and I didn't have a clue what to do in life. And so I was in the Coast Guard when 9/11 kicked off, and we, you know, the Coast Guard played an important role too in, you know, securing the nation, right? I'm proud of all the people that served in the Coast Guard, but the thing is they weren't in the fight, right? They weren't in Afghanistan. And so that's after 9/11 is when I joined the Army, because I wanted to get into the fight, because I wanted to be in the thick of it. I wanted to do the hard things, because I don't want my kids to have to do this crap either. You know, I want to do this. I want to do the hard things. I want to, like, I don't care if I'm uncomfortable. I just want to make a better life for my kids. And I know a lot of veterans feel that's the exact same way. And I know that's kind of like, I'm leading up to that with you, Larry, but I know that's kind of your mentality too, is, you know, you're going to do the hard things, because you are not choosing an easy path here, going for Congress after everything that you've been through. There are much easier routes to be a contractor or whatever. Like, you could certainly just go earn a nice living, probably, you know, take some nice vacation, whatever. But like, you're choosing the harder path. And that's, you know, that's due to that, you know, dedication to the people that you love and the country that you love, and your state too.
You are right. I mean, we haven't talked about it yet, and I'm sure we're going to get to January the 6th, but, you know, making the decision to run for the Texas House I thought about it for a long time because I knew my opponent is going to drag up all of the lies that were told about me, after January the 6th. I get to listen to all of these things again. And so I get to relive that. Fortunately for us and for the country, President Trump won. So, I did get my pilot's licenses back. I had to argue for a while and get a congressman involved to get my FAA medical, but I have that now. It wasn't that I wasn't physically qualified. It's just that somebody in Oklahoma City decided that they weren't going to give a January 6er his first class medical. So he learned the hard way when a congressman got involved, and the doctor that's in charge of the medical evaluations inside the FAA called me and asked to use my case as a case study, because I was very clear with the man what I thought of his observation, and said I was going to get congressmen involved, and did. And so, that was just required. But it would be very easy to just go back to flying airplanes. I was a 737 captain. There is high demand, not just in the airlines, but as a charter pilot, I could go anywhere and do that. But I want to do more now. I think we probably ought to talk a little bit about January the 6th, but between serving my country there and serving my country as a political prisoner, and that's exactly what I was. I was a political prisoner of war of this illegitimate administration. We see it more now. I mean, I think we're on the cusp of actually seeing the whole J6 hoax exposed. But more importantly, for the American people to see that their vote was actually stolen in 2020. I truly believe that. I've read books by Patrick Byrne. I read Ken Paxton's argument before the Supreme Court. I read a bunch of testimony from people in Michigan as well as Pennsylvania. I am absolutely certain that election was stolen with the absentee ballots. I'm not alone. President Trump still insists in that. Attorney General Ken Paxton said that recently. There are many good Republicans that honestly believe that election was stolen. I did a statistical analysis, and if you look at the number of votes in terms of vote jumps between elections from 1960 forward, all right, the 2020 election was 2.5 standard deviations, but above the normal vote deviation. So again, it's mathematically impossible to do what Joe Biden did. But let's go back a little bit. Yes, I could have a much easier life, but the people of Texas are worth fighting for. I talked to a single mother last night, and she came up to me and said, I just have one question of you. What are you going to do about my property taxes? Because I'm to the point where I don't know how I can make ends meet. Theoretically, the state of Texas gave Texans $51 billion in property tax relief over the last few years, and yet her property taxes went up $300 a month. And I said, well, here's what I'm going to do for you right off the bat. I'm going to make it to where the city, the county, the school district, and they can't raise your taxes unless you vote for it. Gee, imagine that, an American wanting the people to decide something. What a concept. And then, she brought up, my initial plan is to take care of our senior citizens. I don't want any Texan to get thrown out of their houses. And yes, Texans are losing their homes because our property taxes are so high. And I've got a plan to provide them relief, but I don't have a good plan for a lady in her situation. Now, I got to come up with one. And so I'm going to write a friend of mine at Texans for Financial Responsibility and see what mechanisms actually exist. Because Texas spent $43 billion more, and we had a $24 billion surplus, if you will. So that's $67 billion in property tax relief that we could have given our citizens out of the 86.8 that was taken. And yet we don't have any mechanism to give people relief. Government's grown at a 40% rate. Her salary's grown at about a 3% rate over the past 4 years. It's just not acceptable. And so I think Americans like you, Jay, you, Kimmy, and myself have got to get in the game. If January 6th taught me anything, it is that full contact citizenship is now required. We got to buckle up our helmets and start popping the big government in the mouth with conservative policies, with conservative activism. I am a classic Ronald Reagan Republican. I want small government. The less government is the best government. And so, to hear that, the anguish in her voice and how she's going to provide for her children last night, it was definitely eye-opening for me. Today, I received a notice from a man that wants me to see what I can do about stopping a cement plant being built right behind the neighborhood. So again, people are already asking me for help, and I'm not in office. And that's because the incumbent won't do anything to help people. He only helps the people that donate to his campaign in large dollar amounts. And that's what's wrong with our political system. It's a corrosive effect of money. It's citizens like us three that need to get involved. But let's be honest, Jay, I know you've got kids. Kimmy, I don't know your backstory, but we're busy living life, being good Americans. And we've always had a government that we thought we could trust. But January 6th taught me that just isn't true anymore. And seeing what's happened to Texans, reference property taxes, et cetera, reference the invasion that we had into our state across the Mexican border, we just need a better plan. We need a better crop of people in Austin that will actually listen and do things. So that's why I'm running for office, is to actually help the people of my district and the rest of the state, because we need 10 more good Republicans. And you won't have a speaker that makes deals with Democrats. He will actually represent the party and enact all of the Republican Party of Texas's legislative priorities. And that's what I intend to do, is work with the party, with the people that are already there, and with my constituents to find good solutions to eliminate property tax. We need to cut spending. We need to secure our elections. We need more power in Texas, just because all the people coming here, a lot more if we want to lead in AI and data processing, which I do. And we need to hold our judges accountable. I did not know this, but Kimmy, let's say you were suing me and Jay was the judge. All right. Do you know that I could donate to that judge to his campaign fund while our case is going on? And he doesn't have to tell you, and he doesn't have to share with you that I've actually donated to his campaign. Now, I'd like to think that our judges are good, honest people, and that wouldn't sway their votes. But yeah, I'm not really trusting judges after my experience on January the 6th. So those are the things that
I'm sure you aren't, Larry. I'm sure you aren't, especially the Biden judges that are coming in, and everything that Trump tries to, handle, they come in and they try to, oversee it and say, no, we're not going to allow this. It's like every single thing he tries to do. I can't think of one thing that he's tried to do that they haven't come in and blocked. I mean, and everything that he's doing is for the good of our country. So I did want to ask you, oh, sorry, Jay, go ahead. Whoever that was, Larry, maybe. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Go ahead, man. Ask your question.
I guess I want to say, when you're elected to Texas House, which you are going to, Larry, lots of confidence in you.
Thank you.
What are the top 3 issues you aim to address?
Well, number one is property tax relief, and with a goal of eliminating it. Candidates routinely say, I'm going to do something my first time. All right. You cannot eliminate property taxes in Texas in 2 years. And that's because cities, counties depend on those taxes for essential services like police, fire, and the schools. So we've got to come up with a plan to do it. But we can certainly provide immediate property tax relief for our citizens. And that's what I want right out of the gate. The second thing is, I want to cut government spending. In Texas right now, they grow the budget at growth times inflation, all right, every year. All right. Again, that's led to 43% growth in state spending in the past 2 sessions. All right. They've gone above what they're supposed to do, because growth times inflation would be 27%. I want to see it as just growth plus inflation. I really want to see every agency take a haircut. I want to see Texas thoroughly doged. And so, we need to live within a budget that is not growing at 21.5% annually or biannually. So, I want to do that. And then the third thing is secure elections, because Kimmy, if we don't have free elections, if we don't have confidence that the people we elect were fairly chosen, then we don't have a country. And, I believe with all of my heart that Biden was selected as president by a cabal inside the deep state. I wish we could get those people. I wish they would come forward and confess. They probably will never do that, though. But I want to believe it at issues from the county dog catcher to the president of the United States that people have a say in their government. And so to me, paper ballots, same day counting, I like to go back to precinct level counting. We in absolute accountability in the software systems and double checking to make sure all the votes are secure and all the votes are counted. They accuse us all the time of not wanting or, trying to make minorities not vote. No. We're the party that wants everyone to vote. They don't want everyone to vote. They just want their people to vote, and they want illegals to vote. So that can't happen either.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because my good friend Texas one, he and I went up to Idaho, and we were talking about some things with their state legislatures, and one of the things that we were talking about was getting people out to vote, because I think that's important in Georgia too, and how could we do that? And he had the idea to make a tax credit, a $50 tax credit for every time you go to vote, with the maximum of $100 per year. And I think it's a fantastic idea. Why wouldn't we do that? That would encourage voters, and that should be a bipartisan thing, but the thing is like, I think it helps conservatives more than it does Democrats, but it's positive legislation to help help the people out a little bit. $50 may not be a lot to me or you, but it's a lot to some people, and that would make a difference to them. So I think it's another encouraging way that we could have people come out. I think it's a really great idea.
I don't know how you would do that in Texas, because we don't have a state income tax. So I don't know, you don't really file anything. I guess it could be a break on your property taxes, but there would be whole new growth in government. How do I prove you actually went and voted? All of that. So I hear what you're saying. I like that idea. I like actually President Trump's idea of making the day a national holiday so that everybody goes to the polls. I mean, there's no excuse if it's a national holiday not to get to the polls. So we'll see what happens.
Cut down on the month long. Like, you don't, like, granted, there should be, for service members, I voted absentee for many years just because I was overseas, I was deployed, I was away from my state. There should be some mechanism for that. But the thing is like, I don't think you need a month long voting process, right? You could do like a week of early voting, and then you have the in voting, or the day of the holiday, right? So like, the early voting, you get like the people that are on duty, like the emergency services, the ones that can't get off or whatever, and then you have election day, where it's a holiday where 99% of everybody else can go vote or whatever. So I'm with you on that for sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, we got just under 2,000 people in here. So, Kimmy, you want to reset?
Of course. That's what I was getting ready to do, Jay. If everybody's listening, could please repost the live for us so we can get some more people in here. We are so honored to have Larry Brock with us tonight. He's got great stuff to talk about. Great. He's running for Texas. Is it Texas House? Correct? Yeah, Texas House.
Yes.
At the state level, and just honored to have him. So if you could all share out the live, that would be awesome. Let's get some patriots in here. So I want to talk to you. It's funny, Larry, that you talk about, and you were talking about election integrity, and the last two candidates that we have had on the last few nights. That's like the number one. That's something we always talk about. I mean, because if you really think about it, nothing matters if we don't have election integrity, right? I mean, voting. None of it matters. So, like, I agree with you. Doug Billings, who's running for governor of Kansas, had said that we need to, just like what Trump has says, we need to make it a national holiday, one day of voting. Don't complain if you have to wait in line. Like he said, Our soldiers back in the early days never complained because they had to wait in line to vote. This is our most privileged opportunity that we have, right? Is
Yes, ma'am.
voting. So, and I think we need to, my idea is get rid of the machines altogether, but that's not going to happen. This month-long voting BS, the early voting and it's just the drop box. Like here in California, we have drop boxes. There's one place to go vote in person, which is quite a bit away, at least where I live in my county. About a 2.5 hour drive, but I did it. I did that, of course, in 2020, for President Trump. And I will do it again. Yeah, we have drop boxes everywhere, like in front of the grocery store, in front of the post office, where they actually used to be like, voting locations, polling, places to go and vote. And those have not been reopened since COVID. And I just don't understand that. But
Well,
anyway,
I do. I mean, they're fraud machines. Those ballot boxes are fraud machines.
of
Anybody can put
course.
in them. I mean, we all watched 2,000 Mules. Wasn't that the name of it, from Dinesh D'Souza? The mules
Yeah.
in Georgia feeding votes into ballot drop boxes. I can't stand ballot drop boxes. They really should be banned completely. They're just fraud machines.
For sure. Yeah. In Georgia, thankfully they moved the drop boxes inside, so they're monitored. I don't think that completely solves the problem, because I don't think there's a lot of, security with the mail ballots, right? They're anybody can sign them. You hear stories about, kids signing them for their grandparents who aren't even coherent or whatever. Like it's just a really hard thing to control, and to say that that there's any security is absolutely ridiculous there, because there's not. It's just, you can do whatever you want when you're in your home or whatever. You could bribe, you could collect them if you had people that didn't really care about it or whatever, and then have them vote in it's just it's a really bad situation. And it's not, they say, it's to help out people or whatever, to get more votes out or whatever. And, they talk about like troops and stuff like that, but it's completely opposite. When I was a soldier and I did it, it was completely controlled. You had a voting officer, they checked your ID and everything. It's a controlled process, whereas this is completely uncontrolled. It's just bad system altogether. So we got over 2,000 people watching now too, but I want to just kind of briefly lead up to January 6th, and I don't want to actually dwell too much on January 6th, because we kind of know this story a lot, but I want to talk about it and what it means to you in terms of like running for your seat, because I think it shapes who you are, and I think it. We'll get into that. So just leading up to that, you were kind of working in the industry, and just you were a contractor. Do I understand that, or were you all airlines?
I was working for a private airline company called Hillwood Airways. I had been a contractor working in Iraq and Afghanistan. I have bad luck early January. So I was at Al Assad Air Base when the Iranian missiles hit Al Assad. But we were in a bunker. We were being smart, and I was safe. The following January, obviously January the 6th happened. I was a 737 captain for Hillwood Airways, and we were flying things around on a government contract. So when I say things, there were times I didn't know what was in the back of the airplane. I was just told to fly to this country and deliver it. And so that's what I did. But it was actually a really enjoyable job, great group of people. I thoroughly enjoyed, traveling around Europe and Africa, doing business for the United States government. So it was very enjoyable. And then, they stole the election. On January the 6th, I went there because the president asked us to. I was hopeful that Vice President Pence would use the authority he had, and he did have it, despite his own protestation, or they wouldn't have changed the law to make it to where the vice president doesn't have that power now. But I was hopeful that he would send the fraudulent votes back to the states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, everywhere that we saw the Dominion F curve, you know, in the middle of the night with the straight vertical line of Biden votes. So I went there, and then, you know, I fortunately for me, went out of the way on my way towards the Capitol to get some coffee. And so by the time I got to the Capitol, there really wasn't much to see. The ski fencing had already been removed. The bike racks were gone. I didn't see any tear gas. I didn't see any of that nonsense going on. I walked right up to the doors, right by 4 riot policemen in gear, full gear, right through open doors. They didn't say a word to me, and oh, how I wish they had. If just one officer had said, "Don't go in there," I wouldn't have gone in. Even while I was inside the Capitol, nobody ever asked me to leave, ever. I went up to an officer and said, "Hey, I'd like to leave. Can you tell me where the nearest exit is?" And he said, "I'll walk with you there." Not, "Oh, you're under arrest," or "I'm going to take you there now." It was, "Hey, yeah, let's walk there together." And so I did that, and then, you know, exited. You can see actually the 2 videos that I made reference January the 6th on my campaign website, LarryBrockForTexas.com. But, you know, it shows me being entirely peaceful. While I was inside the Capitol, I protected Capitol Police. I told people to be respectful and not destroy anything. I kept a man from vandalizing the Senate. I told somebody to get out of Vice President Pence's chair. The only rap you're going to have on me is, well, he was wearing a scary helmet and you know, body armor. Why were you wearing that? Now, in hindsight, if you have to go anywhere in the United States where you think body armor and a helmet's required, you probably ought to not go there. Let the authorities handle that. But at the time, the president asked us to be there to protest the stolen election, and Antifa and BLM had stabbed a Trump protester in December. So I wore personal protective equipment to protect myself from BLM and Antifa, not from the Capitol Police. All right. Now, the rest of the J6 story, Jay, I'll honor what you said, not really get into it, except to say that, in my opinion, it absolutely was a setup. You know, Capitol Police Chief Son just the other day told Nancy Pelosi it's time to come clean on that. You know, we've seen that the Capitol Police shot first. You know, we've seen that the doors were open. We've seen unidentified people ripping windows open, opening magnetically locked doors that can't be opened unless they're opened by the police in their control zone. So again, there's just too many anomalies there. Even in my own trial, they wouldn't give me the video that showed me physically restraining a protester from chasing an undercover policeman. All right. Now, it turns out that the guy that I protected happened to be an African-American gentleman in a coat and tie. I saw a white guy all in black like Antifa chasing him. All right. So, you know, that's reality. Okay. Me seeing a guy getting attacked and defending him, not knowing who he was, just not wanting any violence inside the Capitol. But a few days later, I got to read that I was a white supremacist. You know, the two things don't square. But again, it's just part of the lies that we're told about every single J6er afterwards. And, you know, that's kind of the hardest part, honestly, about running, is I get to relive these lies. You know, literally at the time, I was dating a woman from Africa, and she said to me, "I didn't know you were a white supremacist." And I said, "I didn't either." You know, so, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's just ridiculous, the things that were said about us. There was an instance where my former ex-wife, well, now ex-wife, but she threatened to hurt her son. He called me. It was my stepson at one point in time, obviously, and said, "Hey, come get me. My dad's driving down from Montana to take me away from her." So I said, "Sure." And she actually, before I even got there, threatened to hurt her own son. So the police wrote all this down and said there was a terroristic threat from the house that I was titled in my name, but I had been separated from her for 3 years. All right. Well, so now I had a reporter take that story and make it sound like I was the one that had made the threat. And I can't sue her for defamation because my defense attorney was telling me to stay quiet and not say anything. So I have to provide a police report to prove to everyone that I'm telling the truth, that it was her and it wasn't me. I didn't do anything. But again, my candidate, the guy I'm running against, he's already told someone, I'm going to define him and make him look terrible. So I know exactly what he's going to try and do. And I understand why he's going to do it, because you can't run on his record. It's terrible. But, it's painful to get to do that. But the people of Texas are absolutely worth it. And honestly, we got to have people like me that are willing to get into the fight, people like you two as well. I preach it all the time in my space. Jay, I know you were in there today, and I talked about it again. We've got to get engaged. We, the good people of America, cannot let our country go down anymore. All right, but getting back to January the 6th. So I left and came home, and I'll be honest with you, I knew it was going to be really bad as soon as I turned on the TV in my hotel room when I got back from the Capitol and saw the video imagery, when I heard the word insurrection. So when I got back to Texas on the 7th, I went to go see my son, and that night I immediately started getting death threats from leftists. I had been identified somehow, and, they just started pouring in. So the following day on Friday morning, I made the decision to lose all of my guns. And so I don't have a lot. I'm actually kind of gun poor as a Texan. I think I've only got 8 or 9, but they all got lost in a mysterious boating accident, and I couldn't remember where they were until I was pardoned. And then it was suddenly like a veil lifted, and I remembered where my guns were, and I was able to go and get them back. But, the FBI knew who I was on that Friday. They raided my apartment later that afternoon, and I wasn't there because of the death threats. I made the decision to go stay with my father he lives inside a gated community. So they knew who I was, but they didn't call me. And that's because they were trying to stage a show arrest. Well, how do you know that? Well, my nephew saw an FBI SWAT team at an elementary school near where my father's house was. I don't know why they didn't do it, but they didn't. On Sunday, they gave me a call, and they said, hey, we'd just like to talk to you. And I was like, this is fantastic. I'm not going to get swatted. I'm not going to get arrested. This is wonderful news. All right. And that's before I knew that the FBI is nothing but a servant of the party of lies and the father of lies. So, as a matter of fact, I call them the FBI routinely. All right. So turns out that they were just negotiating to get an arrest warrant for me. They had the arrest warrant, and my attorney called me and said, hey, they just issued a warrant for your arrest. Go turn yourself in. So I turned myself in an hour after I knew they had the arrest warrant, and an hour earlier than what the FBI had agreed to meet at the location. Now, I didn't know at the time that the Grapevine City Hall, I lived in a small Texas town called Grapevine, Texas, had a prison in it. But I was about to find out. So, they lied, and they arrested me on the spot. There was a full SWAT team there. They had guns drawn, asking me if I had any firearms, spread eagling me. And I was nothing but cooperative with them the entire time. Turns out the press showed up at 4:30. How do you know that if you were under arrest? Because my nieces came to get my car, and they told me that the press was there, and the press asked them a whole bunch of questions. So they immediately tried to interrogate me, but, I'm pretty smart. So I said, hey, I'll wait until I have an attorney, and, chose to exercise my rights as an American. Little did I know that many of them would be stripped from me later. So I spent the night in jail for the first night, and the next 4 nights I was in isolation in the Parker County Jail. The FBI lied to me and told me that I would be able to speak with an attorney. I was not. I believe, and I don't know that I've told this story on the air, Jay, but while I was in isolation in the Parker County Jail, they let me out of the cell one time, and that was to go and roam around a basketball gym. And there was a 13-gallon trash bag in the gym. There's no trash cans in the gym. There's nothing there. There was no reason for that trash bag to be there. And I'm pretty convinced it was there because they wanted me to take it back to my cell and kill myself. But, I'm a Christian. I believe that's a mortal sin, and I would never do that to my parents or my children. So, again, that's why I chose not to do that. After 4 days, there was a hearing. The government wanted to keep me in jail even though I had done nothing violent at all, and I only had misdemeanor charges at the time. Fortunately, a Texas judge said no and put me under house arrest, but it was an incredibly strict house arrest. I was not allowed to have an internet connected phone. Originally, I had to have a flip phone. Then they had insisted on software on my computer, like I was trying to communicate with, or the Rebel Alliance or something. I mean, I discovered just how bad our government could become real quick. Eventually, after 7 months, I was let off of house arrest. I tried to see my son, but I was denied the opportunity to see him. There's a Texas judge that she believes the whole violent J6 narrative, despite video evidence to the contrary. She's just not going to let me see my son. So that's a fight I've got to have as soon as I can build up enough money in the bank, is to have the right to see my son that I really haven't seen since he was 7 years old, because my ex is trying to keep me out of his life as much as possible. And he's been denied the opportunity to see his grandparents, both sets of my parents as well. So again, that's the biggest casualty from the decision to participate in the protest on January the 6th. Jay, can you still hear me? Because you're frozen.
I know he's frozen with his eyes closed. It's like, is he taking a nap?
All right. No, I
can hear you.
I just.
It looks like you're asleep, Jay. It looks like you're asleep. You taking a snooze.
All right. No.
Sorry.
I just wanted to make sure that, because I've had some issues, not with my computer, but previously in Spaces. All right. So eventually I went to trial, and that was in November of 2022. So, that's a long time to have this sword hanging over your head. They never really offered me a plea until the very, very end. And that's because they wanted to make an example out of me. I am the senior ranking J6 political prisoner. They wanted to crucify me, and they did. Kimmy, you've already pointed out the DC judges, and my judge, Judge John D. Bates, was one of them. The man should lose his law license. All right. He, in the process of my trial, violated my First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendment rights. And then when he knew my Eighth Amendment right was being violated and I had been in solitary confinement for over 100 days, did nothing. He violated my Fifth Amendment rights by keeping me in jail when I won an appeal. All right. He said to my attorney, I'm not letting Mr. Brock out because he's expressed no remorse. I have the right to remain silent. It's called the Fifth Amendment. He needs to read it. That judge needs to be impeached. As a matter of fact, after he tried to stop President Trump from stopping the government's sexual transitioning websites, Tennessee Congressman, I believe it's Oglesby, I could be wrong on that, offered to impeach Judge Bates. And I said, absolutely. Can I help? Please, sir. And sent him an email to that effect. So eventually, after 4 days in trial, I was found guilty. There's no hope. Again, I say this before, but Kimmy, I don't know that you've heard it. Not one January the 6er that had a jury trial was acquitted in Washington, D.C., because the jury pool voted 96% for Hillary, 95% for Biden, and 93% for Kamala. You had no hope of a fair trial, and they knew that. So that's a violation of your Sixth Amendment rights. All right. So the only other thing of note in there, other than the Capitol Police officer testifying that I had protected him, all right, was the fact that they read into evidence against me a portion of the Declaration of Independence that I had quoted on Facebook. So again, in Washington, D.C., you had a U.S. attorney reading into evidence from an FBI agent, a Facebook post in front of the Great Seal of the United States in the nation's capital against an American military officer. When any form of government becomes destructive of these means, it is their right to alter or abolish it. I was thinking to myself, boy, if there is not ever a clearer case for why that was written in the Declaration of Independence than this, I don't know. But my attorney nudged me and said, can you believe this is happening? And I said, no. So I was sentenced to 2 years. The government asked for 6. Now, again, if you've ever watched the video, you'll see all I really did is walk in and protect police. That's it. And they wanted to give me 6 years in prison for that. All right. That's how bad the Biden DOJ was, and that's how bad these judges were. But fortunately, because of the letter that I already talked about that the Major General wrote, and because of some charitable things I had done in life, the judge only gave me 2. But that's still 2 years for what I had done. Now, they gave us like 5 misdemeanor charges, and then they charged me with the felony. That's called vertical overcharging and lateral overcharging. And they did that to everyone to try and bolster their case, to make it look like it was much more significant. But let's be honest. What should we really be charged with? Trespassing? Maybe. Because the fencing was gone. It was not identified as a restricted area. Law enforcement was standing right there and the doors were open and they said nothing. But I'll cede to them trespassing. That's a Class B misdemeanor and a $50 fine, rather than 2 years in jail and the absolute destruction of my life. So, not allowed to see my son, had him taken away from me by a Texas judge. Lost my pilot's licenses because they said I was a terrorist threat, which I got them back as soon as President Trump was in office. No change in who I was. All right. Then they took away my license for the home inspection company that I ran. And again, I had to get all of those licenses back. And just 2 weeks ago, I was successful in getting my FAA medical back. So again, it's a matter of rebuilding my life, but I've lost my business. I lost my job that paid me $200,000 a year. And so, yes, I'm suing the government. Now, while I was in prison, and guys, stop me because I can talk about this a lot, but while I was in prison, all right, I taught people mathematics. Steve Bannon taught political science. I would have liked to have taught that, but they told me I was going to teach math. So I had 5 prisoners that had never passed the GED, and I got all 5 of them passed. I taught them one-on-one, just me and them, teaching them, how to pass a test. And so I got them through that. Now, in June of 2023, I had been in prison for about 30 days. And Pam Hemphill, the J6 granny, the same lady that refused the pardon, said it was all President Trump's fault. He's the one that made me go, and she got all this media play. And so as the senior ranking J6 political prisoner, I put out guidance in line with the 4th article of I think, Jay, you guys learned it as the Fighting Americans Code of Conduct. For me, it was the American Fighting Man's Code of Conduct. Article 4, if I become a prisoner of war, I will keep faith with my fellow prisoners. I will give no information or take part of any action which might be harmful to my comrades. If I am senior, I will take command. I am senior. I took command. So I issued guidance to all the other J6 political prisoners to use your time wisely, improve your education while you're in prison, obey the rules of the gulag that you're in, make no oral or written statements disloyal to President Trump or the United States of America. All right. And that's in line with the 5th article of the American Fighting Man's Code of Conduct. All right. When questioned, should I become a prisoner of war, I am bound to give only name, rank, service number, and date of birth. I will evade answering further questions to the utmost of my ability. I will make no oral or written statements disloyal to my country and its allies or harmful to their cause. I guess the Academy's 4th class education still sticks with me. But, all right. So I was senior. I obeyed the code of conduct. And you're saying, well, you weren't really a political prisoner. Yes, I was. I was absolutely a political prisoner in a communist government. All right. We were prepared. Jay, did you go through Siri? Did you go through survival, evasion, resistance, escape, or whatever the Army equivalent of it is?
Yeah.
Okay. So you practice being inside a resistance compound, and you practice what to do if a communist government captures you. I just had no idea that it would be the United States government that I would become a political prisoner in. So for issuing that guidance, Timmy, they decided that I needed to be in a cell. They accused me of starting a prison gang because I said we're all members of the 5th Allied Political Prisoner of War Wing. And they said that I was communicating with other prisoners. Well, they're right on that one. But it's my duty as the senior ranking officer to communicate to people to be loyal. So for doing my duty as a military officer, they put me in isolation for 127 days. Now, 30 days is all they're allowed to do it. The warden can extend it another 30, and then they have to get regional approval to go past that. There's a rule called the Mandela Rule where you're not supposed to go over 30 days as well. So we violated those laws. We violated my 8th Amendment rights by doing that. Now, again, I am not alone. This happens routinely throughout our prison system, that men and women spend longer time in isolation than they are required to do so. So mostly it was isolation. I say isolation because for 127 days, for 23 hours a day, I was in a 5x8 cell. All right. And I was allowed to walk 1 hour back and forth in a cage a day during the weekdays. On the weekends, I was kept in there 24 hours a day. So they occasionally put people in there with me. One of the guys that they put in there with me had 15 deaths to his credit. He was a fentanyl dealer from Canada. And, you know, I'm pretty convinced the man was mentally unstable and they put him in there so that he would hurt me, because that's what they do in prison. If they don't like somebody, they try and have them killed by putting them in groups of people that would harm them. Like they'll put a white guy in with a black gang, or they'll put a black guy in with the Aryan Brotherhood or whatever. So eventually they removed this guy for psychiatric observation and he didn't come back. So I was thankful for that. So the second time they tried to kill me is they tried to transfer me based off that direction and guidance I gave to a prison that is full of actual Al-Qaeda. The Somali pirate, famous from the Tom Hanks movie where he's a tanker captain. All right, he's in there. There are a lot of other actual captured Al-Qaeda terrorists in there. There was a Christian man killed inside that unit just a few years ago. So they wanted to send me there knowing that I had fought Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So they wanted to send me to a prison full of them. That was eventually denied when my uncle wrote a letter to the director of prisons saying this is tantamount to a death sentence. You were trying to kill him. So 9 days after he wrote that letter, I was let out of solitary confinement. A week later, they threw me back in and told me I was never getting out again until I left the prison. And it turns out that 4 days after that, because I had a system, I learned the first time for my family to be notified that I was let out again. No reason for throwing me in given, but when I was let out the second time, a lieutenant came up to me and said, "You need to be very careful. The captain here hates you, and he has a very checkered reputation, you know, because he had been in a prison where actual inmate deaths had occurred." And so I took that lieutenant's, you know, guidance to heart. Now, the third time they tried to kill me, I told you they tried to send me to a prison full of Al-Qaeda, right? Well, when they couldn't send me to Al-Qaeda, when Al-Qaeda came to the prison, they put him sleeping 5 feet from me. And so for 5 days, I got to kind of try and sleep with one eye open at night, worried about Abid Nasir. You can Google his name and look him up. But he was sleeping 5 feet from me. Their own guards raised so much hell with the administration that they moved him. How do I know that? The same lieutenant told me that was the reason he'd gotten moved. So eventually, after 372 days in prison and 131 of it in isolation, I was let out of the Springfield Gulag and allowed to go to a halfway house. Now, I had a speech that I had written, and I wanted to give a speech in my service dress. It was important to me to put on my uniform and to feel like an American again after I had been a political prisoner of an illegitimate and criminal regime. And so I put my uniform on and I gave a speech, and I was hopeful that 10,000 people would see it. Now, it's not my pinned tweet anymore, but it was for a while. Eventually, 10 million people saw it. So I was very, very happy with the absolute turnout on that. So it's humbling to think that that many people would listen to me. So I had to go to a halfway house. I spent a little over a month at a halfway house, and then I was under house arrest for 2 more months. Now, during that time, the Supreme Court overturned the felony that I had been convicted of. All right. So rather than just vacate the felony, then the judge kept the felony in place, and he did that deliberately to deny me of my right to vote in the 2024 election. because in Texas, as a convicted felon, if you're still serving on probation, you're not allowed to vote. Well, I wanted to do something to help President Trump get elected, because I knew the quickest path to help all of my fellow J6ers, men that I consider to be belonging to me as a part of my political prisoner of war wing, was to get President Trump elected. So as soon as I was free, I called the Republican Party and said, I'd like to register voters. Well, guess what you can't do in the state of Texas as a convicted felon? You can't register voters. So I couldn't do that. And then they said, hey, we'd like you as a precinct chair. Well, I couldn't move my address because I was a convicted felon. So the only thing I could do was talk. And so that's why I made the decision to start the reckoning on X. Now, the show has boomed. You know, we were at one point averaging over 1,000 a day, and now it's declined to where we're anywhere between 300 and 700, usually around 5. And that's because there are competing spaces. And so I'm doing my best to offer a good product. But, you know, I wanted to tell the truth because I knew the media was going to try and lie Kamala into office. And so the whole purpose of the reckoning was to tell the truth about the news from a political perspective and to make sure that any lies that the media concocted about President Trump were immediately dispelled. Since then, I've discovered I really enjoy doing it. You know, I like talking to the audience. You guys host spaces. It's enjoyable to interact with them and you know, hear the opinions of different Americans. You know, Jay, I always like it when you grab a mic in my space. So that's what I did. And then, you know, I've got my licenses back, so I'm rebuilding my real estate business. I can't honestly become a pilot right now, even though I've got all the licenses, because I'm running for office. And so what happened is I started speaking at groups about J6, and they literally said, you need to run for office. You need to run for office. As a matter of fact, one of the first places I spoke at was a meeting called Restore the Republic. And they said, you need to run for office here in Frisco, Texas. And so I listened to those people and made the decision to run for office in Frisco, Texas. I love it. It's a beautiful city. I'm glad I'm here. It's far enough out of the city to where I don't have to worry about a lot of that nonsense, but it's close enough to where I can get in and go watch the Dallas Stars play, or, you know, drive over to Fort Worth and go see the rodeo, which I did a few months ago. So again, you know, that's kind of my January the 6th experience. You know, the key takeaways there are freedom is incredibly precious. I mean, I can't tell you, you know, just sitting in a 5x8 cell after being, you know, an American military officer going, how did I get here? It was absolutely amazing how fast the government turned on me and how fast it turned again. You know, I was pardoned by President Trump. But because I had won an appeal and because the Supreme Court threw out the felony, I was due to be resentenced. And so I had all charges dropped on the 23rd. So now, even though I served 2 years in prison, I was technically not convicted of anything. And the same judge that convicted me signed the letter saying that all charges are dropped without prejudice. But, you know, I tell you, I'm honestly fearful of what will happen if we have a Democratic president again. I've seen just how quickly and how, you know, that they can imprison their political opponents. And they did it without the rest of America standing up. And so today I talked about that. I talked about courage, about how we have to be vigilant, to guard our rights. You know, we need to not give them an inch. You know, today I was told by one of my co-hosts that the FBI is buying data on what I buy off of Amazon or what you buy off of Amazon. What right do they have to acquire that data without a warrant? I'm sorry, but the FBI is an out-of-control agency, and it's got to be burned to the ground, and then we need to rebuild it in some image that actually honors the Constitution. So anyway, that's a side topic. I apologize. All right. Do you have any questions for me on the whole January 6th thing?
Oh my gosh, you were so awesome, Larry. Yeah, I kind of want to go on just a couple more questions. It's getting late. I know we've been going for about almost 2 hours. So I just want to ask you, we have a question. We have actually a statement from the audience. But I want to go on to my own question, but there are still 12 people who did not get a pardon for J6. So what's going on with those 12 people? Do you know, or do you have, like Joe Biggs, for example? You
I
heard
do
anything about
know.
that?
All right, so they're the ones that, and I don't know why this happened, but I think they were the ones that were convicted of sedition. Um, when the flooding occurred in Kerrville, Texas, I volunteered to go down and look for little girls along the river, and the man that went down with me to go do that was Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers, and he was one that just had his sentence commuted. So they are applying for individual pardons. I think what it was some attorney gave President Trump bad advice to just delay these. But my understanding is he has actually pardoned a few people. But and I know that Colonel Rhodes' package is in, all right, to be pardoned. But it hasn't been approved yet. But I can tell you from talking to him, the man did not commit sedition. And look at the life he's leading afterwards, talking about America, how much it means to him. And he was amongst the first people to go down into Kerrville. You know who else was there? Joe Biggs. All right. So, I met some, and you know where we stayed? It was a J6er that put us up, down there. Jenny, I don't know her new last name. Forgive me. She remarried after her travails. Jenny Cudd was her name when she was a J6 defendant. So again, this is the salt. These people are the heartbeat of America, and they're not anything like what the media has said. And, it's really going to come down to this. I need people to, if you believe President Trump had the election stolen, if you believe that the media lies about him all the time, if you believe that the media lied to you about the Russian hoax, about the COVID nonsense, all right, if you believe those lies, just take it a step further and maybe question the narrative that the media has on January 6ers, because by and large, the vast majority of us did not assault law enforcement officers. And even the people with an assault charge, you've got to dig into it and find out if they really did it, or if, they were pushed into a fence and that fence pushed a policeman and therefore they got an assault charge. I know that happened to a friend of mine. That's why I bring that up. But to my knowledge, and I asked the lady that wrote out all the pardons, only 30 to 35 people actually threw punches or swung clubs or things at law enforcement or a baseball bat. And I don't understand why a man that swung a baseball bat at an officer's head received a full pardon, but Stuart Rhodes did not, when he didn't even go into the Capitol. So again, I'm hopeful that President Trump will right the wrong, the bad advice that he was given by those attorneys, and those additional 12 will get a full pardon. If you had asked me, I would have never supported a full pardon for anybody that had actually struck law enforcement with a baseball bat. I'm a Republican. I believe in law and order. And so, I think that their sentences should have been commuted because they were denied due process. But, as far as a full pardon, no, absolutely not.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah, just feel bad for these 12 people who
I do too.
because they've lost all of their benefits from the VA. They aren't able to survive. They aren't able to live. They aren't able to eat. Everything's gone.
Kimmy, can I just, what you just said is incredibly true. I mean, you cannot, I applied just for a manager's job at Walmart just to see if I could get it. Not that I wanted to do it. And you get to the second round and you're immediately out because they Google you in your J6 history. All the media lies are still on the internet. All right. So again, J6ers, I tell every J6er that I know, you need to build a trade. You need to get into a trade and you need to build your own company because you don't have a hope really of regaining your life working for a corporation. I know people that have been hired to work at Lowe's or Home Depot, and a day or two later, they've been fired. Our lives were essentially stopped that day. You take away a man's job or a woman's job and you take away their life. And so, we do need restitution for what was done, just to get back, not just to the magnitude of the injustice, but, we can't get jobs as a group. I'm fortunate in that I have a skill. I'm in the trades and I have my own company, so I can provide some, food for myself. But, there are J6ers that are not as fortunate as I am. And we do need restitution. And there's a lawsuit. There are a group of us that are working with a lawyer, and he's in negotiation with the DOJ right now. And I'm hopeful that will result in some restorative justice for all the wrongs that have been done to January 6ers.
It's, you mentioned that, and, today I looked up online, and there's still that Air Force Times hit piece on you on the web. You know what I mean? Like you've been pardoned. These charges are gone. You're not guilty of these things, but yet, the Air Force Times still has this out on the web. This hit piece that they did on you, it's crazy to me. And, to hear your military history leading up to that, it's really, it's just crazy that how they came after you, and how, coordinated it was from the Department of Justice to the media, just like going all in on you guys and bombarding you. And it was really, there was really nothing we could do standing on the sidelines watching all this happen. As John and Jane Doe America, we were just watching it happen and feeling terrible for you guys, because we saw the videos, we saw it was a tour, people just going inside, like looking around or whatever, and walking out, and now they're getting treated like terrorists. It's crazy.
It's a really good point. I mean, they did actually label us a terrorist. I received a letter saying you are a threat of terrorism and a possible air pirate, which cracked me up. But they also demanded that I surrender my licenses at that time. But, I can't, that's what I'm saying. You can't get rid of that negativity. And, my opponent, like I said, has already said he's going to try and define me on the basis of these false articles. And again, we see it with President Trump. We're seeing that Adam Schiff and James Comey leaked stories, and then the media ran with those stories. The media just took the story from the government, and they told it as if it was true. As a matter of fact, they won Pulitzer Prizes off of their lies. And so it's the exact same thing with January 6ers and with many of their stories. I mean, Jay, I protected police that day. I protected an African-American policeman, and I'm being called a racist and somebody that carried flex cuffs to hurt someone. I told somebody to respect the vice president's chair, his chair, and yet I was accused of trying to hurt the vice president. I would never in my life do that. I would give my life for him because I'm still a military guy and he's in the chain of command. So again, this is just it's not who we are as a people. And that's why accountability has to happen for these people that told these lies, for the people that told the lies even. Again, I want a free press, but a free press that challenges the government and not just buys a narrative the way they did. And again, it's just horrendous. What has happened to people, there has to be restorative justice. And I'm not saying that because I have a great desire to cash out. I'm saying it because lives have been destroyed. And the government of the United States willfully, deliberately did that. I mean, Jay, if Kamala had won, you might have found yourself in prison beside me. And you say it couldn't happen. Well, I didn't think it could happen to me for walking into a building, and I wound up for 2 years as a federal prisoner. I mean, so again, freedom is incredibly precious. And, you say, what could we have done? You're right. It's not Joe Q. Public that I'm upset with. It's our Republican congressmen and senators that did nothing. They did nothing to help us. They're doing nothing now to investigate January the 6th. Only Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are pulling things out about the president. Pull on those threads. The J5 pipe bomber. Let's find out what agency he worked for, because I'm told he's a government contractor. Who built those gallows that featured so prominently? It's been rumored that they're FBI agents that did it. Why did they never once find the J5 pipe bomber who theoretically put a pipe bomb 20 feet from Kamala Harris, or the agents that built the gallows theoretically to hang Mike Pence? Why are we not finding those? Again, why aren't the Republican lawmakers demanding it? Again, I talk all the time about truth. Truth, truth, truth. We have to be brave. We have to confront that the fact that our own government stole an election, that they faked an insurrection, that they put people in jail and violated the Constitution to do it, and those people are still in power. The same bureaucrats are there. Right now, they've got a boss that won't let them do it again, but what happens if it's President Pritzker, President Shapiro, President Whitmer, President Newsom? They're back in business, and it's going to be worse when they have AI. So again, we have to recommit as Americans to the Constitution, to the Bill of Rights. And I am running to protect my fellow Texans from the next Democratic president that wants to foster an invasion of my state, the next Democratic president that wants to have Texas citizens suffer rendition to DC courts. Not on my watch, pal. All right, we need to pass laws in Texas that do not allow the federal government to take a Texas citizen out of this state unless the sheriff and the attorney general approve it. Again, we cannot trust the government at all. And if you think you can, you just can't. You need to think of them as a wasp's nest. Stay away from them or they will sting you. And again, that's just how I feel about the federal government.
And thank you so much. Larry, isn't it unbelievable that we are actually talking about these subjects right now?
Yes.
Isn't it crazy that we're even having a discussion on the way our country's been run for the last 10 years? I mean, I'm just looking, currently the last 10 years. It's just everything is corrupt. I just want to ask you one last question.
Yes, ma'am.
And then Jay can go to you or whatever he'd like. What are your feelings about Adam Schiff, James Comey, John Brennan, all those little, the people that belong in prison? I just want to ask you how you feel about that. Like, what do you think is going to be done? Do you think anything's going to happen? Like, what is your gut feeling on Adam Schiff?
Well, we've got the issue of the blanket pardon that he was given in Adam Schiff's particular case. Now, I don't know if Brennan has that same pardon. I don't know if Hillary does. I don't know if Obama does. But honestly, Kimmy, I don't believe that Attorney General Bondi will prosecute them. I don't think we will see them in handcuffs. I know everyone's saying give her time. All right. You have to look at this from my perspective. All right. Within 3 days of January 6th, there was an arrest warrant. All right. On the 4th day, I was locked up. They said I was a flight risk and wanted to keep me in prison. All right. Schiff has a lot of money. So does everyone else you mentioned. They are flight risks. They should be in handcuffs inside cells right now. I mean, Barack Obama was involved in a seditious conspiracy against the president of the United States. If you read the actual criminal code, it is textbook. Same thing. Adam Schiff, textbook, violating the Espionage Act. I can't remember the exact criminal code, but he did it. And so they should be in jail. An aggressive attorney general, a Matt Gaetz as attorney general, would see these Democrats in handcuffs. And Kimmy, it's vital to the United States that we again restore the words on the front of the Supreme Court, equal justice under law. It's not vindictive. It is a desire to restore my country's two-tiered system of justice that exists today into one system of justice, one nation under law. And it's critical that we do this. And if Attorney General Bondi fails to do this, we are going to lose massively in the midterms. But if she has the courage to do it, I think you're going to see the American people once again rally behind President Trump that is trying to restore America and, as he says frequently, make America great again the way it once was. We have to have one system of justice for every American, and we have to honor the Bill of Rights. I can't tell you how disappointed I am in the FBI agents that swore the same oath that Jay and I did to uphold and defend the Constitution, and then spat on it and stepped on it while they went and arrested their fellow citizens. They should know better. And each one of them is required to go to the Holocaust Museum at graduation where they see the end result of where they were trying to take us. That is the end result. Hitler just didn't start by putting the Jews in the showers and the ovens. All right. It started with deplatforming the Jews. It started with hurting their businesses. It started with arresting them. All right. That's how it starts. It starts every time in history. And we were on that path until the American people, to quote Roosevelt here, in their righteous might, stood up and said no and elected President Trump to make America great again. And so I want to be an optimist, but I'm not with her in charge. But I do think Dad, as I call President Trump because he's the world's dad, will eventually make somebody, either Pam Bondi or somebody, arrest these Democrats because they richly deserve it.
Almost definitely. I don't know if you saw and this will be my last question, Larry. I don't know if you noticed that when he was at his press conference today, he looked right at Pam Bondi and pointed to her. He said, I was talking about the Russian collusion and Adam Schiff, and he pointed right to her. Pam, you better be on this, or some, I can't quote.
No, I did not see that.
Yes, he
That's
pointed
good
to her. This is ridiculous. She hasn't done anything.
Absolutely.
You know what? I was thinking, I've seen a lot of comments on X how Janine Pirro should have been AG. And I agree. Look at her. She's a freaking bulldog.
Absolutely. Either her or Matt Gaetz. I mean, Matt Gaetz, I wish he wouldn't have resigned. I know why he did. But yeah.
Isn't ready to do anything, then we definitely need to replace her. And she better do something with this shifty shift crap.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, Jay. I'm done asking questions. I've talked everybody's ear off. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Jay.
No, I was just going to say, the American people are hungry for justice, right? They just want the rule of law. They want, equal treatment under law. And so, you see that in the way that Judge Janine is received, because she's not overpromising. She's saying to be tough, and she's saying to, that she's going to enforce the law. And so she doesn't make promises for things that she can't do. She said, exactly what she plans on doing. And I believe 100% that she's going to do everything that she said she's going to do. And so these are the type of people that we need in these positions. So, it's just, regardless of how you feel about all these things, it's just, we really just want equal justice is what we want, because that's what we didn't get. We got unfair justice. We got treated differently than other people. You can even see that in, regardless of how you feel about him, in George Santos's case, right? You can see Democrats getting away with it and him going to prison for 7 years. It's regardless of how you feel about George Santos, he was treated differently, and because of his, being a conservative. So it's just not fair in a lot of ways. So, if one goes to prison, they should all go to prison if they're doing the same crime. If one gets to go free, they should all get to go free. It shouldn't be, one just goes and the rest get a completely different treatment because they're a Democrat. And so that's what Americans are hungry for, is equal justice.
Yep. For all
so
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No.
Just, for all the pessimism and all the things, a couple of questions I'm usually asked is, would you do it again? The loss of my son has been almost unbearable to me. But, the issue that I was fighting for or protesting for is so pure and so right that I would do it again. And my reason for this is, America to me is a perfect country. I love her with all that I am, but she is run by imperfect people, imperfect men and women. So again, Langston Hughes said, America is the land that never has been yet must be. He's absolutely right. We aspire to such high and lofty goals that we have to have men and women willing to fight for her. And make no mistake, politics is a fight, just without weapons. You are using force at that ballot box when you cast a vote for a Republican. You are telling the socialists and the communists, I do not want my country invaded. I do not want my children groomed to be transgender. I do not want a Muslim invasion of my land. I do not want excessive taxes. That's what that vote is doing. and we need fighters. So I'm asking each of you to please join with me, go to my website, do what you can. All right, help me out, because we need people that will fight for this country, that have fought for this country. You know, a lot of times we look for our politicians to be perfect, you know, men like Mitt Romney, you know, but they don't deliver for us. You know, Donald Trump, I make jokes about it all the time, but he's just a straight up gangster. I mean, he's got 34 felonies, theoretically. He's got 3 ex-wives, and you know, he got shot. How gangster can you get? So, you know, we need fighters, not perfect men, but men of iron that are willing to take the fight to the enemy. And the enemy is the Democratic Party that is trying to strangle you in taxes, strangle you with foreigners, and trying to deprive you of your God-given right as an American to live and breathe free. So do what you can. All right, help me out. Help me get elected. Put people in office like me that are willing to fight for you. Okay, I'll be your representative and not the representative of the big lobbyists. That's just the way I was brought up. I learned a good hard lesson from my grandpa about work, and that won't change. So again, Jay, I know you're a precinct chair. Thank you for your service. All right, Kimmy, I don't know if you're involved in the Republican Party, but everybody that's listening, get involved. You can block walk for a candidate you believe in. You can sign up to be a precinct chair. You can join a local grassroots organization. Get involved. It's full contact citizenship time. Democrats win in 26 and 28, we're in trouble. So get in the game. All right. Thank you.
Yep. And you definitely, you know, the thing about too is you as a candidate, you've seen the darker side of what our government can do. And so you have a new perspective, and, you know, I want people to understand what's going on. I don't want them to be fleeced when things are happening there, because you need to be quick on your feet and you need to understand the system. And so that's why I think you'll be a perfect candidate too, because you're a fighter, right? You didn't choose the easy road. Like I said, you could have just went and been a contractor and made a great living and probably had a, you know, beach house in Panama or something like that, and just, you know, had a pretty nice life. But you went the hard road. You got involved in politics. You're taking this thing that happened to you, and you're going to create a positive thing from it. And so I just thank you for that. Thank you for your service too. But thank you for, you know, not giving up, because we're seeing a lot of people start to give up as we're going into the midterms. And me and Kimmy, that's why we're doing these lives, is we're helping candidates and stuff like that. But we're like, we need to turn it back on. We need to turn the politics back on. We need to help get you guys out there, get you exposure, get you name recognition. And we need to like keep going with this, because if we don't, you know, we're going to get pummeled in the midterms is the way I see it. And so that's our contribution. That's our small contribution to this, to hopefully help get your name out there. Where can people find you?
All right. Obviously on X, at Larry Brock Jr., but my campaign website is larrybrockfortexas.com. So that's where you can find me there as well. I have a Facebook page, but I don't like to advertise for Meta. So it's just there because it needs to be there. But it's Larry Brock for HD 106 is the Facebook page. So thank you for having me on. Thank you for the fight that you are putting forward, you and Kimmy. We need people telling the truth at all times. And like I said, get in the game, folks. Be optimistic. We have our president in place. We just have to keep his agenda moving forward. And that requires the same level of effort and fury that we had in terms of our work effort to get him in office in the first place.
Yep. Follow Larry Brock on X. He does fantastic spaces at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. The Reckoning, it's a really great space. They talk politics. They have open forum where you can get up there and talk with everybody. It's really fantastic. They have great guests that come in there. Just a fantastic space. It's worth your time. And Larry Brock running for House District or Texas House District 106, right?
Yes, sir.
106. All right. So, help him out. take a look at his page, donate if you can, support Larry, and get the word out about him, because he's going to be a fantastic addition to the Texas House. Get that place under control and get them doing the things that Texans want them to do. It doesn't
Yes,
seem like they're doing that right now.
Nope,
So,
they're not. But they will.
Yeah. So yeah, we had 2,500 listeners tonight. So I appreciate you coming in here. I appreciate everybody coming in and supporting you, Larry. Fantastic guest. Really fantastic story. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. God bless you both. Y'all have a great night.
And thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate
Larry.
you.
Yes, ma'am. All right.
Yeah, I also want to thank all of our listeners. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We appreciate you so much. Please join us again. We will probably have some guests coming up in a couple of days, most likely. And we love y'all. Thank you so much, Larry.
You bet.
Love sharing your story. Thank you. And thank you,
Appreciate
Jay,
you, Larry,
for hosting.
All right, Kimmy. Well, another good live tonight. I appreciate you coming in here. Appreciate everybody watching, supporting. Fantastic guest, really great person. Larry Brock. Go in and listen to his spaces. Check out his campaign page. You will become a fan of him if you aren't already. The more you learn about him, really great speaker and a really fantastic patriot. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
All right,
everybody.
Kimmy.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much,
have a
everybody.
good night.
Fantastic candidate. You too, Jay. Good night, everybody.